There are over 1,300 cards currently legal in Hearthstone's standard format right now, but you'd be forgiven if you thought the number was something more like 100. Every game you're running into a Rainbow DK or Odin Warrior, you're seeing Kobold Miner and Burrow Blaster and Reno, and when's the last time you even played against a Demon Hunter? Well, today, I want to open your eyes to the cards that are neglected, unwanted, and forgotten. Let's go to HS Replay, show sparse data, and look at Hearthstone cards nobody plays. Shapeless Constellation. Shapeless Constellation is an 8-mana 8/8 priest epic that transforms into a random minion in your hand. With no tribe and no way to discount this card, it's not like you're going to be cheating something out early like back with Muckmorpher. You could use this as a way to get a 1-mana discount on Flesh Behemoth, or if you're really thrifty you could get a 2-mana discount on Neptulon. Now this card could serve as 2 extra copies of a legendary you want to play a lot of. Aman'Thul being the clearest example. Aman'Thul is an incredibly strong singular card that can be a value engine, a control tool, and tempo all in one with its fantastic abilities. So getting extra copies of Aman'Thul should make Shapeless Constellation viable, except in the same set as Shapeless Constellation we get Creation Protocol. This card, for 2 mana, can get you an extra copy of Aman'Thul, or 2 extra copies if you forge it. And by being a forge card, it now allows you to run Ignis. You can also run 2 copies of Power Chord Synchronize, Zola the Gorgon, and maybe throw in some Brewmasters if you feel like it. Shapeless Constellation can also lead to some awkward moments when you have both copies in your hand at once, or if it transforms into Armorsmith or some kind of similarly weak minion. All in all, too expensive, too slow, too bad. Chun trivia time. 2 cards in Showdown in the Badlands include the words High Noon. One is Reno Lone Ranger, a shockingly powerful disruption card that is able to remove previously untouchable cards, lock your opponent out of their strategies, and upgrades your hero power for the rest of the game. The other is this piece of shit. High Noon Duelist is a 3-mana 4/3 minion with Death Rattle. Both players draw. Destroy the card that costs less. A card whose utility is hard to unearth. It's strange how this random rare card gets a fun wording like back in the old days of Power Overwhelming or Gelbin Mechatork. A throwback to the Grand Tournament's Joust mechanic, and you know the sentence is going to be good when it starts with a throwback to the Grand Tournament's Joust mechanic. This card acts as an arguably better Polluted Hoarder and a most likely worse Loot Hoarder. Which is unfortunate because Loot Hoarder is already a worse version of Gold Panner. If you thought this card could be an interesting card for a mill deck, you must realize Selfish Shellfish is a strong tempo option that is more likely to destroy your opponent's cards while also keeping your own cards safe. Because, of course, this is a symmetrical effect. So if your opponent has a high cost deck or happens to get lucky, you could be paying 3 mana to give your opponent a card and burn one of your own. I do want to mention that this card does have potential against a Plague Death Knight deck where you can use this card to destroy plagues that have been made eternal by Helia. That being said, you are still paying 3 mana to draw your opponent a card. Merch Seller. Wait, Merch Seller?
I told her don't call me Rishon, you better call me Mr. Chavo, cause I won't see you tomorrow. I'm smoking splits or runs and Tahoes, and we don't smoke on gelato. Told my driver watch for potholes. She cuffing hunchos when she dry clothes. Ain't tripping on the Bible, just don't touch my codeine bottles.
Merch Seller is a 4-mana 3/5 Naga that places a random spell on top of your opponent's deck at the end of your turn. It's part of a collection of cards meant to just bother the opponent, like Cult Neophyte, Dirty Rat, Snake Oil Seller, and Barbaric Sorceress. A little understated for 4 mana, it at least has 5 health and is guaranteed to go off at least once. A reasonable disruption tool that more or less makes your opponent skip a draw. This effect is a lot better in Marvel Snap than it is in Hearthstone. The biggest issue with this card is that price tag. 4 mana with no taunt is a lot to ask for a mild inconvenience. And it's too bad since the card can be used with Naga synergies to be drawn fairly consistently. Maybe it's for the best this card isn't good, because if you don't have a good way to remove it already in your hand, it could potentially lock you out of your deck as early as turn 4. Uh-oh, you know what that sound means. It's time for Cards No One Plays Lightning Round. Today's topic is Demon Hunter. Yep, that's right. Much like in top 10 biggest nerfs of all time, Demon Hunter gets to be its own spot. Honorable mention to Gunslinger Kurtrus, who sees enough play to not be included in this, but is such a horrendous Highlander payoff that it brings down the play rate of all the other Demon Hunter cards. Let's give special focus to the, I guess we'll call it a draw a bunch of cards Demon Hunter archetype. Argonite Golem is like Lion's Frenzy if Lion's Frenzy was like a really bad card. Mindbender feels like it should be alright, but 4 mana is brutal. Maybe you can discount it with the Argus Titan. Crixus seems designed around the Death Rattle Demon Hunter support that used to be in Standard, but is now just a card with way too big of a downside, even when you have Magnifying Glaive. Eridar Deceptor and Crystalline Smasher are supposed to give you tempo while you waste your turn setting up a Sigil of Time or whatever. Pocket Sand and other quick draw cards pair with this strategy nicely, except no tradable makes this card pretty yucky. Guitar Soloist lets you tutor 3 cards, and you just lost to Aggro Paladin. As the last surviving inhabitant on Feast of Souls Island, it makes me sad to see these cards just not have enough goo even with Gaslight Gatekeeper. Hodir, Father of Giants, who interestingly has terrible synergy with Son of Hodir, talk about a dysfunctional family, is an 8 mana 8/8 Hunter legendary that sets the stats of the next 3 minions you play to 8/8. Similar to Odin, this is an 8 mana minion that doesn't have taunt or rush or any other immediate board impact. However, unlike Odin, this card is not in a class with a bounty of board clears, nor is the effect as strong as the obscene amounts of damage that Odin can pump out. Even Highlander Hunter decks aren't running this card and are opting for more beast-focused strategies around Faithful Companions and big beasts like Hydralodon and King Crush. The effect is not useless, as it can turn Hollow Hound into a huge threat and Deldarin into a lot of damage, but Hunter strategies that are able to hold onto the board until turn 8 want something a lot better than a bunch of stats that immediately disappear into Blade Storm or similar. Curse of Flesh. Hey, do you remember Commander Ulthok? It's actually still in Standard, by the way, but for 5 mana, you can make your opponent's cards cost health instead of mana. Why you would want to do this largely escapes me. Maybe you can put your opponent to 5 health or something and then play this to prevent them from playing many cards. That would also have to exist in a world where Warlock cannot just deal 5 damage for 5 mana. Ultimately, the card proved too slow to see real play. So, what if we discounted the card a little bit? Well, Curse of Flesh makes your opponent's minions cost health next turn for only 1 mana. And it still costs too much. Outside of tricking a greedy opponent into spending 29 health on minions, it's hard to see what kind of advantage this gets you. You are spending a mana and a card to give your opponent a massive tempo advantage, or even give your opponent access to combos that would be impossible with only 10 mana. Cards that heal you, like Voodoo Doctor or Armor Vendor, are now combo extenders, and you can still use the mana you are not using on minions for spells. If you want to give your opponent a highlight clip, you can play this card. Otherwise, I would say to avoid it. Noxious Infiltrator. I don't really believe this card exists. A 4 mana 2/5 rogue minion with entirely too much text on it. I mean, like, look at this, it barely even fits. Part of a cycle of cards in March of the Lich King that got a bonus if a friendly undead minion died after your last turn. This poisonous minion gets a bonus of dealing 1 damage to a minion. This would then activate poisonous and destroy any minion damaged by that effect. I think there is some attempt to make a control rogue archetype with poison and undead minions like One Hit Wonder and Tough Crowd and Tar Slick? Alright, maybe there wasn't a control strategy in mind, but you try to make heads or tails out of these rogue cards. Like Stitch Creation, who is very lucky to not be appearing in today's list, by the way. Of course, the cherry on top is that Noxious Infiltrator is not itself an undead, so you can't even try to chain one off the other. Burden of Pride. Nostalgic for the days of Mortal Strike being a conditional fireball if you have 12 or less health. What about Revenge? How about the more lenient Draconid Crusher who gets +3/+3 when you have 15 or less? Well, if you have 20 or less health, Burden of Pride gives its 3/1/3 taunts an extra +1/+1. That's sort of okay, I guess. It's 12 health worth of taunts, but it's very susceptible to cards like Blades to Armor, Star Power, anything. Also, the problem with this type of card being in Warrior is that Warrior wants to proactively gain armor at the start of games in order to survive the opponent's blows. By trying to get yourself to take 10 damage early in the game, you must not be playing the shield blocks and the like you should be. Now, having your hero under 20 health constitutes a damage-friendly character, which is great for Light of the Phoenix and maybe Blazing Power, but what else does having 20 or less?
Oh yeah, that's Sheriff Bellbrim's music. If you have 20 or less health, you get to open Badlands Jail, which makes a minion go dormant for 3 turns, which is pretty slow.
Especially against board-based decks that would have gotten you below 21 health, and useless against combo decks, and will probably just get swept away by Reno.
Sheriff Bellbrim, oh yeah.
Torghast Custodian. I don't know how this got in here. As the comments in this Chun Trivia post clearly state, this is not a real card. I mean, why would Shaman have an 8-mana Tribeless minion that conditionally gains Rush, Wind Fury, and Divine Shield based on the number of enemy minions, when for 9 mana it can summon Walking Mountain that has Rush, Lifesteal, and Mega Wind Fury? In exactly the situation that your opponent has 3 smallish minions on turn 8, you can take out 2 of them. I really don't understand this card. You could try to pair this with Worgen Roadie maybe, but that is a lot of effort for something that doesn't compare favorably to Mishmash Mosher, or Therigeneer Drake, or Giant Tumbleweed, or Horn of the Windlord. Yeah, this card's horrendous. The Badlands Bandits. The Badlands Bandits is the long-awaited sequel to Party Up, and I mean long-awaited sequel in the same way Paul Blart 2 is a long-awaited sequel to Paul Blart. For a 6-mana legendary spell, you add 8 3/2 bandits with random bonus effects to your hand, and any that don't fit in your hand get summoned. This was part of a hand paladin archetype in Showdown in the Badlands that included Lawful Longarm, Living Horizon, and I guess that's it, I guess. If you ever wanted to fill your hand with bad cards, you can knock yourself right out with this. You could combine this with the Sunwell to fill your board with mediocre tokens, but Paladin could already readily do that with cards like Showdown, or Mining Casualties, or Jury Duty, or Muster for Battle, or Stand Against Darkness. Ultimately, a very mediocre card that certainly doesn't feel like a legendary. Anyway, thanks for watching. Always remember to subscrindo to Chundo and join the Discord below. Oh, and follow me on Twitter too. Yeah. Thanks for watching.